Hello, friends. A friend of mine asked me to remind him about the rules of this practice called T-Group, and I thought I would make a video so that Rob, hi Rob, would have access to the rules, but also if anyone else wanted a reminder or wanted to know a little bit more about T-Group, they would have this video. So I'm gonna give you the rules of T-Group. First, I'm just gonna say, what is T-Group? So T-Group is a relational practice. It's a practice you do in relationship with people. Typically, you have a small group, maybe like 4, 5, or 6 people. And you sit around for a period of time, maybe 45 minutes, and you follow certain rules of communication, and you talk to each other. But you don't just talk to each other about anything. You don't just have chit chat. You don't just make small talk. There's a structure to the kinds of conversation that you have, which has the intention and the effect of creating a deepening inside of the group and a deepening inside of your own experience. So it's a kind of like a meditation practice, but instead of a meditation that you do by yourself on a cushion, it's a meditation that you do in a group of people, like with other people. So sometimes it's called an intersubjective meditation. Subjective meditation is I'm just meditating on my own subjective experience. Intersubjective meditation means I'm meditating on the intersubjective experience within a group of people. Okay, now it's really cool because you can have all kinds of really extraordinary experiences with a group of people doing this practice. So sometimes you can get really high together, like there's like a kind of endorphin rush that you can have, and oxytocin, and all these kind of hormonal highs. It can lead to really interesting insights about your own relationship with other people and with social situations and with relationship. Like, it's when you meditate, sitting meditation, one of the benefits of sitting meditation is you have time to be with what's actually happening. Like, you get to slow down and be like, oh, this is what my internal world is like, that on a day-to-day basis I'm not paying attention. So a relational meditation does the same thing, but this is what my internal world is like while I'm communicating with people. So you start to notice these micro emotions, these micro feelings of shame, of anger, of fear, of sadness, of disconnect. You just start to be able to track them, and then you can bring it back into your kind of day-to-day life, and you notice, and I've noticed from years of doing these kinds of practices, that it just makes much more available in relationship, in my kind of day-to-day life. My friendships are richer, my romantic relationship is richer, my family relationships are richer. All of these things get better from doing this practice, T-Group. Okay, so that's the pitch. That's why you should listen to these next few minutes where I explain the practice and explain the rules. But first, I have to do a little bit of history. It's part of my nature, is I have to just give a little bit of historical context about the time and where this stuff came from. So the original T-Groups came out of Stanford University therapy programs in the 60s, maybe the 50s actually, late 50s. And the T in T-Group stands for training. And they were training groups where they were training therapists to have increased sensitivity to their own experience and to other people. So it was a way initially to train therapists. Now, around the same time, you started getting this other kind of group practice called an encounter group that was happening also in California, in Esalen, which is kind of a retreat center, a kind of hippie place. This guy, Fritz Perl, was created this thing called Gestalt therapy, and he was also involved in these encounter groups, and other people did these encounter groups. So encounter groups are kind of more intense versions of these T-groups, where, in an encounter group, maybe like everybody would get in the hot tub and they would all be naked, and then they would like yell at each other or have these kind of like age regression things where someone would play somebody else's mom and like hold them while I weeped, and like there was this kind of these crazy psychological processes. A lot of fun, kind of wacky 60s stuff. I would not be surprised if there was some psychedelics involved somewhere in there. So T-Group, modern T-Group, and by modern T-Group, there are a bunch of different companies. Stanford still does T-Group training. There's there are groups on the West Coast, other places in America doing T-Group training. But there's this phenomena, this branch of the T-Group phenomena, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. So this particular branch was kind of splintered off from the main thread by a guy called Kareem Mohsen, who's a good friend of mine, and he taught some other people, also friends of mine, a guy called Mihai Banilescu. Mihai taught Kelly Nasaris, Benjamin Buell, a bunch of other people, and they all together, they brought it to Boulder, Colorado, and they started to do a weekly free community-led version of this practice, this T-Group practice. And, and it was informed by other practices that they had been involved with, circling, which is another intersubjective practice, orgasmic meditation is another intersubjective practice. So these different various practices influence the Boulder community-led form of T-Group. And now, and what it evolved into is this weekly community-led, it's free, there's no big trainings, there's no kind of organization, like major organization. I mean, there's kind of like some people that help to run it, but there's not like a corporation, or like nobody's making any money, and it's just really that community-driven practice that every Sunday night in someone's house in Boulder, 30 to 40 people show up and do this practice in small groups. The groups break up. So it's extraordinary. It's really, really cool thing that has happened. And the version of T-Group, there are many different versions of many different rules. The version I'm going to tell you now comes from the Boulder tradition, which started, in 2011, 2012. So here it is. So the basic idea is you have a group and you have a time container. So that's very important. So you kind of get together with like 4, 5, 6 people. Those are optimal numbers. Less than that is a little bit kind of awkward. More than that starts to get a little bit kind of overcrowded and like difficult. But you can do it. But in this form, typically 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 people. And you have a time container. Maybe 45 minutes is a good time. And so you set the time container, and then you step into the practice together. And what you're doing in the practice is you are speaking from your direct experience of the moment. So you're just talking about, right now I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling drawn to connect with you over here. I'm feeling confused about what just happened. I'm feeling scared. Like, you're just talking about your own feelings. And, it's just like a normal conversation. So one person will speak and another person will reply. You typically don't talk over each other. You typically don't subgroup, meaning like having multiple conversations happening at once. That can sometimes happen. I would say that's more advanced than when you're first learning this practice. To avoid that, just stick to having one group conversation. And it just goes back and forth like that. So it sounds maybe kind of not that interesting, or kind of weird, kind of limiting, and it's a practice. So if you've ever done sitting meditation, I keep referencing sitting meditation because it's a really good analogy. If you've ever done sitting meditation and you sit down, one of the things that happens is you get bored, or you get frustrated, or impatient, or anxious, or uncomfortable. You want to move, you want to get out of the practice. Say that your practice is to focus on your breath. You're going to check out 100 times, forget to focus on your breath. You're going to start thinking. Other things are going to seem more interesting. But if you keep with the practice, keep coming back to focusing on your breath, there are rich benefits to come. And I think at this point, like, it's pretty inarguable. Not many people would want to contradict that idea, right? Like, meditation practice is good for you, rich benefits come. If you haven't had those benefits yet, I highly recommend it. Meditation is great. I would recommend doing a 10-minute sitting meditation a day. There are lots of resources out there for how to learn how to meditate, and it's great. It's very beneficial, but it can take a minute to get there. So T-Group can be the same. Like, don't expect it necessarily to be like thrilling or rich or juicy right off the bat. Sometimes it is, and you can long for that, and that's part of it. Like, you want to bring your desire. So if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling bored, if you're feeling impatient, you're not supposed to kind of check out from that and be like, I feel fine, right? Like you say, I feel bored, I feel frustrated, I want to feel connected, right? But you don't just want to have those things as well, because if you kind of just flood a space with complaints, then it's not very generative. So you also just want to lead, right? You want to lead with your desire. So if you feel like you want more connection, you can complain and be like, I'm frustrated, I don't have more connection. Or you can reach out to someone and say like, hey, I'd like to feel more connected with you. And then they're going to say something. Or you could say, how is that for you? Well, I'm mixing practices. Now we're going to get into the rules. So that's the basic format. You actually wouldn't say, how is that for you? You would just say, I want to feel more connected with you. I notice when I look at you, I feel drawn. I want to feel more connected. Or it might be, I notice when I look at you, I feel more distance. And I would like to close that distance, right? Whatever it is. So that's the basic kind of form. That's the basic idea of what you're doing. You do that for 45 minutes. Then at the end, typically you'll have a checkout round where everyone just speaks for a minute. And then you can speak freely. And that can be a great time to kind of share some things that were limited by the form. So share some of the stories you were having, the ideas. Like, man, that thing you said, I just need you to know, like, it really resonated because of something that happened earlier that day. You don't really want to get into during the practice. So that's the structure. The last thing you do is a minute checkout. Each person just checks out for a minute, and then you're done. So the rules. So the first rule, kind of basic intention, is you want to share about your experience in the moment. You want to. And you want to be really careful about owning your experience. That means talking about your experience. So if somebody seems angry, you don't really go to, you seem angry. I mean, that's just a little more advanced. You definitely don't say you are angry, right? Because you don't actually know, right? There's always a chance that your perception is wrong, right? Your assumption, your sense of someone, right? Like, we can kind of trust our intuition, and that's good, but you want to hold it with some humility and some understanding that, like, you don't actually know. And even if you do know, like, sometimes you say to someone, like, you're angry, and you know, and they are actually angry, and they don't know, right? That's something that happens. It's typically not very useful to tell someone they're angry if they don't know and you know. Like, it doesn't help. It doesn't create more connection. So even if you're right, in T-Group, we avoid that kind of, like, what's called a projection, whether it's accurate or not, but that naming what's somebody else's experience, whether it's as simple as you're angry, or it's like, oh, like, don't get upset, right? Like, I didn't mean, like, that's not it. So instead, it's a practice, and part of the practice, like, coming back to the breath, coming back to my experience. So if I notice that, like, I want to talk about somebody else's experience, I have to go and look for, like, what's going on for me? Oh, like, I feel scared. Like, often if somebody else seems angry, what's actually going on, well, what's also going on that I can speak to is, I feel scared. So one of the rules is, like, you want to speak from your experience. And related to that is, you don't ask questions in this practice. If there's a facilitator, the facilitator might ask questions, but the Boulder style is typically unfacilitated. The Boulder style, you just don't really ask questions. So again, you just kind of share your own experience, and you trust that the other person's going to share theirs. There's some room for invitation, and again, this is kind of like the basics, and as you kind of advance, as you get better at the practice, you can kind of play a little loose with the rules. But to begin with, avoid asking questions. And there are hand gestures. So I'm going to talk to you about one of the hand gestures. There are hand gestures that allow people to remind each other of some of these rules. So the hand gesture for this is you kind of give an open, it's difficult to get on the camera, you just show someone your open palm like this, and what this means is show your cards. So if somebody is projecting, if somebody's like, hey, don't get upset, then you might say, sure, well, show your cards. Somebody's asking questions like, what's going on with you? Show your cards. Oh, right. No, what's going on with you? But, like, I noticed that I feel disconnected from you, and I would like to feel more connected. Right, so that's a translation into my experience. So show your cards. You want to be careful because you don't want to do it in some kind of like smug, like, I got you way, right? You want to do it as a way of supporting people and remembering the rules, right? And just kind of like, oh yeah, this is what we're doing, and everybody forgets, and it's a friendly gesture. Another rule is you want to kind of basically stick to talking about things in the moment. You don't want to get too much into processing things from the past, even 5 minutes from the past. Like, you really don't want to be talking about things that happened outside of the room. That's just not the practice. It can be really useful to talk with people in a relational meditation setting about things that have happened outside the room, but that's not T-Group. So in T-Group, you basically want to stay to what's happening with yourself and with the other people in the group. And you even want to avoid talking about stuff that happened 5 minutes ago, because you can get into this pattern of like processing. Oh, well, when you said that, I felt this, and that a little bit of that is fine. Like, oh, hearing that when you say that, I feel this. Like, that's fine. But then if you get too stuck into processing some moment from the past, it just dissipates the attention from this present moment. So the hand gesture to remind people about that, if you feel like someone is kind of getting stuck in the past, you feel like you're getting stuck in the past, is this. We just kind of bring it back to the moment. Like, bring it back. Another hand gesture, another rule is to avoid telling stories. So this is kind of similar, but to avoid getting too much into stories about your kind of... telling stories meaning like either just facts that happened, like, well, I said this and then he said that, and really that's telling stories, but also stories in the sense of like bringing too much of your mind into the conversation. Like, some mind is okay, but you don't want to get lost in thought or bring too much of your kind of like, well, when he said this, here's what was going on for me, is I was thinking about this framework that I've been developing about interpersonal communication and how I've one person, right? Like, that's not it. Again, that's fun, that's geeking out, that's philosophizing, but you would call it telling stories. And so the gesture for that is this, and I don't really know why. Now I'm thinking about it. I don't know why that's the gesture, but you do this gesture to kind of suggest like, hey, you might just be kind of heading into a story right now, and you might want to just start to course correct and come back to like, what is your experience right now? So it's kind of similar. You can just do this, you can do this, you can do this. They're all kind of related. One useful tool to keep your mind included, because if you completely delete the mind, we've done this, where you just have no room for the mind. It's all just sharing in the moment experience. There's no time and there's no mind. You can do that, and it's kind of interesting and it's kind of trippy, but it's also gets kind of disconnected, where you just end up with a bunch of people saying, I feel sad, I feel excited, I feel confused, I feel frustrated. There's something that gets kind of weird and disconnected, and you're like, wait, are you feeling sad because of what I said? Like, so it can be helpful to have a little bit of mind, and the way we do that is you give a headline. So you say, I'm feeling frustrated and impatient. And my headline is, I don't know how to connect with you, and I really want to. And I keep trying, but I feel like I'm failing. Right? Like, that would be a headline. So you can use headlines as a way of just including enough of the mind to keep everyone having shared reality about what's going on, but you don't want to get too deep into the mind. You don't want to get too far. That's it. Those are the basic rules, and it can be anything. It's often frustrating, but it's often also rewarding and rich and nourishing, and it gives you things that you can take home that you at first might not realize, but then afterwards you're like, oh wow, that was actually really helpful. It can just be a lot of different things, and I would say the thing that I've described, that is the basic Boulder T-Group form. Use it for a while, practice with it for a while, and then feel free to experiment, like everybody has. Like in Boulder, we've all kind of tried 100 different things, like I said, like no mind, like no rules, subgroups, facilitation, witnesses, where you have people that are not interacting at all but are just witnessing from the outside, naked T-Group, themed T-groups, so like let's bring the theme of grief in. Like, there's kind of many different variations you can do, but you want to have like basic facility, like so many analogies, like the scales, or the scales. If you're learning to play music, you play jazz, you start out by learning the scales before you kind of want to get improvisational. So same thing, this is your scales, this is your basic grounding, and there's so much richness, you can keep coming back to it over and over again. One other tool that can be useful is you can also share visual noticing. So there's like my experience, including But you want to be careful about this because you don't want to say, oh, I noticed that you're angry, right? Again, we want to avoid that kind of projection. We want to own our experience. But you can say, I noticed that your brow is furrowed and your face seems flushed, right? That's a visual noticing. But it can be even like, that's kind of like a little more contentious, a little more charged. But it can be simpler than that. It can be just like, oh, I notice the light is reflecting in your eyes. Or I noticed that your jacket is done all the way up to your neck, or just anything visually you're noticing your breath, right? All of that, what that does is it helps ground, and it's actually really good. It's a good way to start a session. You sit down and like have everyone just do a few noticings of like, what are they noticing externally, and then maybe what are they noticing internally, and then more what are they noticing relationally, right? Like, that would be a good sequence if you wanted to structure things a little more. And it's a really good way to ground people into the present moment in a kind of like in a relatively neutral way. Like if you're just doing noticings, I notice your shoes are blue, right? It just kind of grounds people into the present moment. Okay, that's T-Group. If you watch this video and you try it out, I would love to hear from you. You can find me robbiecarlton.com or wherever you saw this video. I'm sure you can find me. And I would love to hear from you about your experience. What did you learn? What did you discover? Any questions? Is there anything that's unclear? Anything that needs clarifying? Yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I wish you great luck and great joy in your T-Group practice.